Morning, everyone. I am so glad to welcome you to our 10th Town Hall meeting. And believe it or not, our school years are almost over for the children. Today, I want to welcome our special guests, the President of the Vermont School Boards Association, Sue Ceglowski, and the President of the Vermont Superintendents Association, David Younce. They're each going to give us a brief presentation about their roles as the leaders in the state regarding COVID-19. Please remember to put any questions in the chat box or send any questions to the covid-19@vssna.org website. So we're going to start out with Sue, and it's all yours, Sue. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Soph, and hi everyone, good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me to this town hall meeting. I just have one small correction to what Soph said. I'm not the president of the VSBA, I'm the executive director. Our president is Neil Odell. He's the president of our board. I'd like to give special thanks before I get started to Mandy Mayer, who is the wonderful superhero school nurse at the Meadowy Community School, where my children attended elementary school, and who was the first person to invite me to be at your town hall meeting. So thank you, Mandy. First, I wanted to let you know a little bit about the VSBA. We are a nonprofit member association. Our members are supervisory union and supervisory district school boards. And I wanted to state that first because oftentimes people think that the VSBA is part of state government. We are not. We are, as I said, a nonprofit member association. And because we're not part of state government, we do not have any authority to enforce state laws and regulations. Our role is as a member association to support school boards to be effective trustees for public education on behalf of their communities, and also to provide a strong collective voice toward enhancing the cause of public education in Vermont. Public policy positions taken on behalf of the VSBA are developed through a resolutions process. Resolutions are first proposed by school boards, and then they are voted on by our membership at our annual meeting. In order to take a position on a topic about which there is no resolution, the VSBA Board of Directors has to take a vote at one of its monthly meetings. And we have 24 members of our board of directors. We have 11 regions in the state with 2 people from each region, and also a president and a past president that serve on our board. And as I said, they meet monthly. One of the ways that the VSBA supports its members is through a model policy manual. These are model policies that boards can use and adapt for their own use. And it saves them a lot of time and money to use the model policies because they're developed by an attorney, and they're also, we always run them by and collaborate with VSBIT's attorneys when we develop our model policies, so that they have that layer of protection as well. This might be a good time, Clayton, if you're able to pull up the model policy manual on the screen so people could see it. It's divided into 3 sections. We have thank you. We have our required model policies, recommended, and to be considered. And the required are the most important for a school board to get in place because those are mandatory under either state law or federal law. An example of a mandatory, a required policy is the tobacco prohibition policy. An example of a policy that we say school boards should consider is the student medication policy. So those are 2 that are related to the work that you do. The role of school boards really is to ensure that schools are well run. It is not to run them. For the most part, school boards are not health experts. We do have some school nurses and doctors who serve on school boards, but that is definitely not the norm on every board. And we do know that health dynamics are a critical part of all the different parts that are going to go into making sure that schools are operating effectively when students return to school. What can school board members do to best serve their district? What we have been telling them is that it's very important for the school board and the superintendent to stay connected. And even though in-person meetings are not happening for the most part now, staying in touch with the superintendent is important, and also staying connected with the community, because school boards are really that link between the superintendent and the school and the community. We've also let them know that it's very important to let their superintendent lead during a time of crisis, especially at the beginning of this crisis. There wasn't a lot of time to spend deliberating about decisions. Sometimes decisions needed to be made very quickly. So we definitely recommend that they stay in regular contact with their superintendent. School boards are holding regular meetings now. Most of those are online, and there's been quite a bit of public participation. It's important that the district maintains a unified public message and promotes a message that supports the leadership team and that is clear, calm, and reassuring, that's factual, and shows that leadership is communicating well with the community and with each other. At this point, I think I would open it up if there are any questions about what I've just said or about our model policies. And then I know Dave Younce will be speaking from the superintendent's point of view after that.
Sue, thank you very much. I don't see any questions in the chat at this point.
Okay.
Has shared the links with that you had mentioned in the chat box.
Okay.
So I think we'll move to Dave.
There's one new, what has been your recommendation or position on involving school nurses in developing policies and procedures related to health issues?
I know that we haven't developed any new policies since I've been with the VSBA that have to do with health. We've had a few revisions of policies that are based on legal changes. But I do have a working relationship with Sharon Lee Treffry, and she has been, she visited me when I became the executive director. I just became the executive director in November. I think in December or January, we had a meeting. And if we do develop any new policies that are COVID related, we would certainly want to communicate with your organization and get any input that you have. At this time, we don't have any specific COVID related policies, but we're envisioning that that's a possibility because the next school year is probably going to look very different than a normal school year.
Thank you for answering those questions, Sue. Okay, we will move to Dave Younce. He is the current president of the Vermont State Superintendents Association.
Good morning, everyone. And Soph, thanks for welcoming me. First, I just want to piggyback on the question that Sue had about policies. One thing I've found in our field is we often intermingle the terms policies, procedures, and protocols. And often, you know, I'm asked, hey, do we have a policy about this? Or what's our policy on this particular thing? When people actually mean, how do we handle this? Or what is the day-to-day operation? So it is just important to think from the board context. If you look at that model policy list on the VSBA website, that gives you kind of a good sample of what types of things are required by law to have policy, what types of things are a good idea. And a lot of the things that we tend to refer to as policies fall into the protocol realm, which in my district, we try to not codify in policy because policy is hard to change and protocols are very easy to change. So we try to just keep those concepts straight. As Soph said, I'm the president of the VSA. I'm the superintendent of the Mill River Unified Union School District. For those of you looking for a geographic marker, we used to be Rutland South Supervisory Union, so we're in southern Rutland County. I live in Arlington, Vermont, which is in Bennington County, located between Bennington and Manchester, if you want that reference point as well. And I'm really grateful to be here today. I need to extend, I know that several of our nurses are on this call from my district, and they know that I have a definite soft spot in my heart for nurses and school nurses. So I'm grateful for the work that all of you do and the work of this particular association. Things I want to talk about today, I want to talk about what we're doing as a district right now, and then more broadly, I want to share with you kind of what superintendents are thinking about right now. It's important that I give you the disclaimer that in my role with VSA, I don't speak for all superintendents. I represent them. And I will try to make distinctions when I'm making general global statements and when I'm basically sharing like what's Dave's opinion on something. So I'll try to be clear with you as we go through things. But in the Mill River schools, kind of here's where we are. We realized early on we needed to start planning for the fall. And we needed to start planning for the fall in the context of what is likely to be the most restrictive environment that we could see ourselves operating in, because our belief was it makes more sense to design something that's highly restrictive and be able to loosen up than to design something that's very loose and needs to be tightened up later on. So the way we've approached that is we created 4 internal work groups consisting of our internal leadership team. One group focused on systems and schedules and structures, like who shows up where, when, and how, and what does that look like? Another group focused on actual instructional delivery. I think we all know that remote learning, we've gotten by. We know that remote learning has worked like a charm for some students and some teachers. We know that remote learning has been a really heavy lift and very difficult for some other students and some other teachers. And we know that this whole concept has been challenging for families who are navigating, helping their children to learn and needing to take care of their families and their own work at home. So we've been looking at what our instructional delivery options are for the future. We've got a group focused on the likelihood of needing to go to a shutdown again, and how would we do that more efficiently? What did we learn from this last shutdown from a procedural standpoint? How could we kind of make that a flip of a switch event as opposed to something that rolls over multiple weeks? And then finally, the most important piece for this group today, we have an internal group working on our health and wellness protocols. Our lead school nurse runs that group internally. There are a lot of intersections with Department of Health and the work that you're doing as the Vssna that I'll talk about shortly. But that's kind of how we're working on things and focusing on things. Right now, we've got a draft plan that we're refining that I will be presenting to my board in a couple weeks. I think that plan will change as new guidance emerges on an ongoing basis. And once we feel like we've got a decent plan looking forward, we'll keep modifying through the summer as we get to probably the beginning of August, and hopefully get something that's able to be locked in. Because as you know, getting school up and running is not something that just happens overnight. There are all kinds of things that go into to making that happen. In terms of what superintendents are thinking about right now, kind of globally, there are a number of things that are on our minds. School nurse leadership is certainly one of those. And I know that's important to the Vssna, is what role can nurses play in being at the table. My recommendation to you is that having a place at the table is all about relationships. It's all about school nurses having a tight connection with principals, and a pipeline with the superintendent needs to be built on experience, needs to be built on trust, and needs to be built on bringing solutions to the table. You probably understand that as superintendents, we have hundreds of interests that go into getting our schools up and running again. Often those interests are competing, and being able to sort out what information is coming to us and making sure that it will help the organization move forward is critical. So whenever nurses can come to the table with solutions, but be flexible in those solutions, for example, to say, hey, this particular thing needs to happen, and have it be a non-starter if it doesn't happen, that will be problematic because we are dealing with an absolute state of flux right now and a lot of unknowns. So working together will be critical. But I can tell you that I know for a fact that superintendents are interested and desiring in having quality nurse leadership engaged with the process of figuring out what school looks like in the fall and beyond. Connecting to that, we have a crystal clear need for spot on health guidance. I know that your organization has been working diligently for weeks on that. SOF, I forget if it was in this conversation or just before, but SOF talked about, the task force work that's going on at the state level to work with the Department of Health and articulate some of that health guidance. It's important that you be aware that from a superintendent perspective, the health guidance has to land before we can actually make good, clear, firm plans for the fall. We need to know things like, what does isolation need to look like and what goes into that and what are the logistics that will make that happen. We know that PPE is focused on medical personnel, but we need to know what the expectations for PPE are. What types of things will we be expected to have in hand and how are we expected to acquire those things? When you think about group sizes and group sizes allowed in a space, we're even interested in definitions of what is a space. If I'm limited to X number of people in one location, what does subdividing larger locations look like? What are the restrictions that go into that? Those things need to land so we can figure out how to use places like gymnasiums and cafeterias and larger classrooms and smaller classrooms. There's a lot that goes into that. We do have some concerns about duplicated efforts. We know that nurses are working hard on coming up with a lot of clean detail to help schools plan for reopening, but we know that other folks are working on that as well, and we want to make sure that your efforts are not glossed over, or to put a different way, we want to make sure that your efforts are included in the work that's occurring to make sure that the schools open well. And then a personal concern of mine that I think is shared by my colleagues is I have concerns about the restrictions that we may be under. Will they actually allow us to operate? When I think about what it might need to look like to safely run a school, can I actually pull that off? And what does my decision point look like for that? And whose decision ultimately is that? Those things are on our minds as we think about the health protocols. Another thing on our mind is a collaborative and kind of standardized mindset across the state. Superintendent conversations, we are very interested in standardized health protocols and standardized health expectations that we can implement in every district everywhere. But I also would say to you, there's an inherent challenge in that. I know that in Vermont, and I'll come back to this topic a little bit later on, we have this unique individuality about ourselves in Vermont, and we have this individuality about different parts of Vermont where, well, yeah, that's what everybody else is doing, but this is what we're going to do. That exists in a lot of our places. So the concept of standardization is not one that is necessarily always responded to positively in our state. And we need to think about what that will look like if we do roll out standardized procedures. Personally, I would love to see procedures and protocols that are crystal clear and we say, we're all doing this, because that helps us all to do our jobs. But there's a dynamic there that we need to attend to. I would suggest that the availability of high quality licensed school nurses is a challenge that you all understand and know and realize. And I would even go so far as to suggest that licensing may be a hurdle that needs to be considered differently while we're in this COVID context. I don't know how this group will view what I'm about to share with you, but I will share with you that superintendents have recommended that while we are in the COVID crisis, that the school nurse licensing requirements be lifted for a short period of time. The logic there is this. We know that each of your jobs are going to be remarkably different come fall. Not only are you going to be managing health offices as you normally do, you're going to be delivering all kinds of new professional development. You're going to be involved in tracing cases in new and unique ways. The workload will be larger, and that means we're going to need more people power to do that work. And there are times that finding quality licensed school nurses can be a challenge. So we've suggested it might be worth looking at. Could we just bring in RNs that don't have the school nurse licensure, and what would that look like? Could we bring in LPNs that don't have the licensure and the school nurse piece? It's something we're thinking about and talking about overall. Connecting also to that collaborative mindset, I just want to talk again about kind of the nature of our state. I think when it comes to highly functioning health systems, I think we can draw some connections to our Act 46 experience. Some of you work in districts that have thrived in the Act 46 merger world. Others of you work in districts where it has been a battleground in the Act 46 merger world. And prior to Act 46, we all kind of did our own thing. Health services were delivered very hyper locally, and districts were not looking as much at standardizing those things across the board. Now, I'd suggest in larger districts, you know, in the Burlingtons of the world that have scale, some of those things were already in place. But for those of us, for example, I ran 5 different school districts before we merged and we became just one district. Each of those schools had its own history, had its own nursing protocols, like everything was separate, et cetera. I'd suggest that places that have merged successfully and have centralized operations are finding themselves in a better position to organize for a school nurse leader type of model and to have consistent protocols across the board. Folks that have struggled with that process, I'd suggest there's still some struggle in that standardization. Also want to bring up something that you all know, which is the expectations that are placed upon schools expand every single day. One thing I've realized in the course of this COVID experience is that our communities in many ways see us as the primary childcare provider for our younger students, because we're seen as being a high quality, highly structured scenario where kids can safely be to allow students to work. And for some of our parents, that's the top priority, is that they have a place to go, that their kids have a place to go. We also know that we're expected to generally solve lots of other challenges and ills that emerge in society. And so when I talked earlier about your roles expanding and our need for extra help with those roles, you know, the list will continue to grow for us. I think about the mental health challenges that will accompany what's going on right now, and how will we be prepared to handle that? In Rutland County, where we already have a significant shortage of accessing mental health resources for students before COVID. And I don't see those resources, you know, expanding in a way that's going to meet the needs that we have. So I think there's going to be statewide challenges in that regard. Getting close to the end of my talking at you, and then I'll be happy to take whatever you've got for questions. I do need to acknowledge, because this will come up again and again, and we don't feel it quite yet, but I need to share with you that there is unquestionably a fiscal crisis coming for us. We are at the point where we are getting through the 2020 fiscal year, you know, without, as a system of schools, we're not feeling the significant impact. As we enter fiscal year 21, we know that the legislature is trying to figure out how to navigate significant holes in the education fund due to just lack of tax revenue. We know that they're trying to figure out how to navigate the federal funding and what that will and will not look like. It won't shock you that federal funding is much more restrictive in terms of how it can be used than would be ideal for us to meet all the needs that we have. And the following school year, not the one that's coming right now, but the following school year after that, fiscal year 22, so the 2021-2022 school year is what I anticipate will be the toughest of the next few years, because all of these challenges will accumulate as we lead into that. And what that means is extra money for all kinds of different things. I don't anticipate it being available. We look at the CARES funding that is coming from the feds, but again, I share with you that there are significant restrictions on that funding. And there may even be scenarios where if you use that funding for one thing, you might get less funding for something else. So there are some different challenges and concepts that we have to think about in terms of how we spend dollars. Final piece for you to talk about is HR dynamics. Superintendents are thinking about what is the deal from a human resources standpoint. And I would share with you that for those of us that are in the school districts that maybe have 1,000 students or less, which is what mine is, we've got about 900 students. We don't have an HR department. You know, we have a few folks who chip in and get that work done, including the superintendent, but there's not necessarily a branch of the organization that focuses on these things. But I'm worried about, will protocols that we need to follow, will they restrict some of my employees from being able to come to work? I'm worried about teachers and support staff who may say, you know what, I love teaching, but this is not what I signed up for, and I can't keep doing this. I wouldn't be shocked if even in the school nurse population, there may be folks who say, hey, I love what I do, but this is not what I signed up for. And that may impact what our staffing levels look like overall. And we will not have people readily available to fill any voids that are created by that type of thing. Something on my mind is I hear a lot of talk about kids not being vectors for the virus, which is fantastic. But I still think about the tens of thousands of adults that work in our schools. So while kids may not be vectors, adults are. And part of operating schools involves bringing a whole lot of people together in common spaces. And so that is on our mind. How do we protect folks? What do I do if half of my nursing staff is sick themselves and can't be at work? I'll tell you the answer. I can't operate. If I don't have my nurses available, we don't have subs readily available, I can't operate schools. The same thing goes for teachers in classrooms. If we're in a remote setting and I have a teacher who is ill and not able to manage, I can't operate that class in person or remotely. So there's a lot on our minds in terms of what this could all look like from a personnel standpoint. And then finally, liability. I'm starting to hear these questions asked. I know as medical professionals, you think about liability a lot. We are thinking about what are the liability obligations of school districts for scenarios where someone does get sick at work and wants to consider their employer as the responsible party for that exposure and how that exposure may affect a family. So we don't have great answers on that yet, but we're starting to ask those questions to try to figure out what we can. I'd be glad to be quiet now and respond to anything that you might have in terms of questions.
Dave, thank you very much. And before I ask any of the questions in the chat box, I want to respond to your comments about the licensure for school nursing. LPNs, licensed practical nurses, cannot and have not ever been able to be licensed school nurses in Vermont. The biggest reason for that is they do not have, by nursing licensure, the scope and practice to be able to make any assessments. They certainly can provide information, but all assessing has to be done by the registered nurse. That's by law with our nursing license. As you know, school nurses are licensed first by the Board of Nursing and second as school nurses. So the school nurse licensure piece, if you were to hire someone to come on as a school nurse and they do not currently have their licensure, those provisional licenses are just like you would have for a new teacher, is the recommendation you would do for the school nurse. Someone can come in, if you have a licensed school nurse in your school, you can hire to help that person an RN who does not have a school nurse license. And if they're going to be there temporarily, that whole licensure piece through the Agency of Education is not an issue. Temporary meaning less than a year probably. But the LPN can work alongside the school nurse, the registered nurse, but the LPN is not able to work alone for most of what we see in our school nursing offices. So that's the biggest difference, is what they are allowed to do by licensure. Anytime they're trying to do something, anytime an LPN is working by themselves, making an assessment, they are working beyond their scope of practice, and that means they are at risk for losing their nursing license. So lots of questions came up in the chat box about how that might be addressed. So that's why I wanted to address that one first.
No, I appreciate that. And what I would just add to that, Soph, is what we're thinking about is how to get through the crisis stage of this, where we're doing new and unique work. So we're actually not talking, what I'm not talking about is supplementing school nurses with other folks. I'm talking about how do we add more layers of support into that, who are still qualified, health professionals who are licensed in some regard, but without the expectation that we would need to go through the licensing school nurse piece. So I appreciate the context you provide there. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, it certainly is very important for all of us to understand, and we so appreciate both you and Sue being here today, because early on in this crisis, many of the school nurses were responding with, my administration doesn't want to talk to me, doesn't want to hear what I have to say. Don't they realize this is a health issue, not an educational issue? So most appreciative that, that you're both here and giving us the overview of what's going on and the identifying the needs, the little nitty gritty needs on the ground, because those are absolutely important to us as well. So I thank you for that very much. We go to the very first question. This person says, I am eager to discuss Sue and Dave's perspective on summer programming that for some schools will be beginning this month.
Sue, would you like me to go first?
First.
That would be wonderful. Thank you, Dave.
You bet. So this is a situation where I'm sharing my perspective and actually the perspective of my colleagues in my immediate Southwest Vermont region where I work. We made a collective decision among Bennington and Rutland County superintendents that we, even though we are well aware of the need to provide the child care component of summer programs, that we would not be offering any in-person summer programming this summer, at least during the months of June and July. We left August out there because August feels like a long way off, even though we know it's right around the corner, but we didn't want to commit that something would or would not happen in August. But the rationale for our decision was very simple. We didn't yet have clear enough protocols in our mind to feel comfortable that we could safely operate in terms of how do we protect kids and adults in the process of bringing them together. We knew that we didn't have appropriate cleaning supplies in place yet, or PPE for adults that will be working in the medical realm of the summer programming. So that was a decision we made in southwestern Vermont. I know in other regions of Vermont, superintendents have been chewing on that same question. And while I haven't heard any other regions take the same stance that we did in our area, I know that that's really the dilemma folks are dealing with is, can we operate? Do we have the equipment? Can we keep kids and adults safe in the process? And can it be a controlled process? Now, I want to say that we are still providing programming. We are offering some remote summer program options for kids. We are still providing our ESY programming remotely for our special needs students that need to have the extended school year piece. And we are providing driver's ed for those of you who are interested in that. I've got a son who's getting ready to get his license. Driver's ed, we're providing the classroom portion of that remotely, but you may want to know that the driver in-car piece of that, that piece is not occurring right now either because of the proximity and safety issues that go along with that. So that's how we're handling things.
Thank you very much. I'm looking over here to where the chats have been reposted and I lost my place. Dave, collective decision in Rutland, Bennington counties to not offer any in-person, I'm sorry, that was your answer. I haven't had coffee and I've been up since 5 a.m. serving meals and things. Let me try this again. What happens if a policy or procedure is at odds with the Board of Nursing Nurse Practice Act? So that's not a question for you guys, and I'm sorry, I should have read it all the way through. If there is, the policy has to be changed because the nurse cannot do that. You as a nurse are responsible to your nursing license first and foremost. So if it goes against your scope, it has to be dealt with. It has to be changed.
I would agree with that. I would say to our nurses out there, if you find that you're being asked to do something that conflicts with what you know to be your legal, your professional, or your ethical obligations, speaking up about that immediately is pertinent because again, I talked earlier about how the restrictions may put me in a position where I say that we can't operate. And sometimes I'll need that information from folks like you. I'll need to know that, we just can't do this because of these certain reasons. And that information informs our decision-making in terms of how we operate the schools.
Thank you. Sue, this question is for you. How often are existing policies reviewed?
So I had a policy committee meeting just 2 nights ago, and we were talking about this, and I know one of my board members talked to Sue about it. So in our district, what we tend to do on a general rule is we try to have a 3-year policy reevaluation process where we just keep working through policies and check for accuracy and appropriateness. Some of our policies we identify as requiring more frequent review. Some of them we review actually on a yearly basis. But I do want to make sure that you just understand what goes into that. In the system that I'm in, we have a board policy committee, which consists of 5 of our 11 board members. And they meet monthly reviewing policies and working through drafts and that type of thing. Once that committee feels that it has a policy that is in a decent state that they want the board to look at, they approve that policy for a first reading at the board level, which means that it goes to the board and gets considered publicly. If the board agrees that it should keep moving forward, it gets officially warned. There are requirements that it has to be warned 10 days prior to the next meeting in the newspaper of record and the like. And then you can ultimately have a policy approval that occurs after that. So in my context, where my board meets twice a month, the fastest that we ever see a policy work its way through the process is about a 2-month process. I would suggest that the general time frame from review to new approval is more like a 3 to 6 month process on just your average run-of-the-mill policy, if you will. Sue, do you have any more perspective on that from your end?
I would agree with everything that you said, Dave, as far as the time frames. And as far as our model policy manual, we try to stick to that same schedule of every 3 years, making sure that we're looking at each policy. There are a few in there that are older than that we're going to be working on this summer. And every year, at the end of Vermont's legislative session, which is going to be at a different time than usual this year, we take a look at all the laws that have come into effect from that legislative session to see whether there are any new required policies, and we get to work on those right away. And then we let school boards know when we have a new model policy up in our policy manual that's based on a change to the law.
Thank you both for answering that. Next question is an interesting topic I'm sure you've been considering. Have either of your organizations been working with the NEA about leave time for staff who are in high-risk population?
I'll take a shot at that first. I'm not aware of specific coordinated efforts on that topic. What I can say is, up to the current day, when the whole COVID process began and some of the expectations from the governor came down about vulnerable populations and folks reporting to work, working remotely, et cetera, I've found that districts I've interacted with have tried everything possible to work with each individual based on their circumstances to make sure that folks are remaining productively employed while everyone continues to get paid, for our work. I do anticipate that there will need to be some conversation, and it may not be like our organizations in the Vermont NEA, but it may be more at the legislative or the executive branch level with the governor's office and the AOE in terms of how we are expected to manage employee dynamics moving forward. When I talked about my HR concerns, one of those concerns about someone who just can't be at work in the fall if we are in person. I can do everything I can to accommodate, those needs to the extent that I'm no longer able to accommodate them. And school districts and superintendents will need clear direction from the agency and from the governor's office in terms of where we're supposed to go with that.
Thank you. Sue?
I don't have anything to add to that. We haven't had those specific conversations with the Vermont NEA.
Okay. So this might be another question for you, Sue. Have you had conversations about increasing nursing hours to schools that are part-time, or payment for nurses for schools that do not have nurses at this point in time?
I actually think that might be a better question for Dave to answer. I don't have that particular information from specific school boards around the state. Specific boards might have been looking at that topic, but I'm not sure if Dave might have some more information about that.
Yeah, so I have not heard of those conversations specifically, although there are things like that that are on my mind, which is why I brought up earlier the concept of as much flexibility as possible with bringing nursing personnel in. Again, I just need to reiterate though, finances are going to be an issue with this. We do not have a money tree. So when it comes to, as I think about all the work that needs to happen over the summer in order to prepare for August, one of my realities is we don't have extra money to pay people for extra time. And I suspect that's a reality that is going to exist across the state. So any place that we add support will come at the expense of something somewhere else. And those decisions are difficult decisions to be made in the coming months, and see where we end up with that.
Thank you. Have you been talking with districts that have reopened to find out what's working and not working for them?
So like most of you, I'm absorbed in news information every day about what's going on in different parts of the country and the world. I do want to commend the Vssna. I watched the video from your meeting on Monday with the nurse from Switzerland, I believe it was, talking about that experience, which was very informative and provided a nice framework, at least for thought, about how to approach the work that is ahead of all of us. But no, interestingly, you know, in Vermont and in New England, we're in this position where everyone is still in a shutdown type of mode. So we don't have a lot of good regional or local anecdotes to build from. Right now, we're just watching. I think there's this interesting dynamic here where the entire world is trying to solve the same problem right now. And the entire world is mostly coming up with the same answers. And so one thing that I think is advantageous for us with the timing of this and the fact that we are closed for the remainder of this school year is it does give us time to watch other places, especially overseas, see what works and what doesn't work, and hopefully build the most logical approaches that we can. And again, August is around the corner, but we do have the blessing of at least a little bit of time to breathe while we're planning, and hopefully make some good decisions.
I can add a little bit to that just to let you know that I'm involved with weekly phone calls with the executive directors of all the state school boards associations across the country. So while I don't have specific information about schools that have reopened, as that happens, I'll certainly be hearing about how the school board's role in that and any policy changes that are happening in other states. So that's a very valuable resource that I try to, make sure that I participate in every week, so I know what's happening around the country at least.
Thank you, Sue. I think most of us can appreciate how difficult that is to stay on top of the news. Next question.
Hey, Soph.
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to take this time to thank Sue because she does have to go to testify at the legislature. So thank you so much for being with us, Sue, and we appreciate all of your time, and we know you're a busy lady, so we appreciate you coming, and good luck at the legislature.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, and I'm happy to answer any other questions that come up. Feel free to continue communicating with me. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Becca. Next question. Will voids be filled, or will the economic effect mean that personnel is not replaced?
Man, she left me totally on the hot seat with these. You notice that?
She didn't know that question was coming, but
right?
That's what it feels like, I'm sure.
Yeah, no idea. No idea. So the best I can share is just the local context in my district. So The budget that we had approved by our voters in March, we actually were growing on a few positions. We were adding some school counselor positions, some things that we knew were important just in general terms. And once once it became clear that finance was going to be an issue, we've pressed pause on all of those new hires. With the natural attrition that occurs, some of our things, especially special ed roles, we have to do an automatic posting and hiring for some of those spots because we got to meet IEP needs for kids. We've got some other openings like related to retirements and the like that we're kind of staying in limbo on and just pressing pause on to wait to see how things shake out over the next little while. But can't wait until August 1st to try to find a teacher and expect to find the person that you want for a given role. So there's some timing to that. My anticipation is that in all of our districts, I think during this next school year, we're going to see districts trying to save money everywhere they can, under the hope that that money can be rolled over into the following year to reduce tax implications for the following year's budget design. Now, what could that look like? It could look like any number of things. In our district, we're looking at, okay, we know that we have a contractual obligation with our teachers to pay for graduate course reimbursement. That's a standard thing. But can we control our workshops and our professional development? Can we provide all of our professional development internally as opposed to seeking things outside? Trying to make moves that are logical and will save us some money. But I suspect most places will be proceeding with critical hires, kind of just holding and watching with, things that might be able to wait a little while. But ultimately, if kids show up, we have to have adults there to work with them. So there will be positions that'll need to be filled, but you can't run class sizes too high in a COVID restriction, numbers or space environment. So there's a lot for us to navigate there, which again goes back to why the health guidance will be so critical for us, because that will help us to know what's the bottom line. What can a class look like? How many and where? And we kind of will build from there.
Thank you for that answer, Dave. You'll love this one. Probably on the top of everybody's mind. Are there plans in place that school nurse representation will be present in all medical related policies going forward?
So boy, there's layers to that, right? So first, I want to go back to my comment earlier about policies, procedures, and protocols, and just make sure we draw a line there. To me, in the health realm, procedures and protocols are far more important than district policies are. And procedures and protocols can change when the dynamics change. So I share that first. Second, to go back to an earlier point, in terms of a coordinated conversation about school nurse leadership being at the table, I'm not hearing a coordinated statewide conversation, but I think that as school nurses, you have an absolute opportunity in front of you right now to create your place at that table. And to connect with an earlier comment, that is all about relationship with principals and superintendents. It's all about bringing good, valuable, solid information to the table. It's all about being flexible and understanding that not everything is black and white in this world that we're trying to navigate with. Where do we go with some of these things, and realizing that it may not all shake out exactly the way we want to see it shake out, but we'll do the best we can. And I really do think there's an opportunity here, and that school nurses need to be at the table, involved in the conversations and driving the health piece. And again, I speak for all superintendents when I say, we are not health experts, you are. We need your expertise to make sure we're designing environments for kids and adults that work in a safe way. So we're anxiously looking forward to that work together.
Great, thank you, Dave. Are or will written re-entry plans be shared among superintendents, at least among different counties?
Yeah, I suspect so. So like I mentioned earlier, we're working on a reentry plan. It won't shock you. The draft I'm looking at currently is 63 pages. So it's joyful bedtime reading. But the way I interact with my colleagues regionally in Rutland and Bennington counties is once I feel like that's consumable and maybe close to something legit, I'll share that with my colleagues and say, hey, here's what we're working on. Here's where we are. But I also want you to know that superintendents, at least in the Southwest, we meet twice a week to kind of do status checks and talk about what we're all working on. we're divided into 5 regions. So there's Southwest, Southeast, Winooski Valley, Champlain Valley, and then the Northeast Kingdom. Those are the 5 regions that we operate in. And each of those groups meets much more frequently now than they ever did previously prior to COVID. And there's a lot of sharing back and forth. So I don't know that there's a formal, like, hey, everybody share your plans, but I can say that there's a definite informal, hey, here's my plan, here's what I'm working on. That's kind of how that flow goes.
Great, thank you. Will there be discussion around some of the state's most vulnerable special needs population, thinking students who may be unable to practice social distancing? I just shifted now, I can't find my thing. Wearing masks, and who will need close physical assistance and support. This may also address some of the questions related to the needs of the physical health needs of the adults.
Yeah, you bet. And so when you ask that question, what I think about is, again, the work that I know that the nurses are doing, the work that I know, so if the task force that you're on is sorting through, I think those health protocols will be real drivers for us. You know, a lot of the early information I have seen talks about obvious, and I won't use the term mask because we're going to talk about, you know, cloth facial coverings as the appropriate term for that. But facial coverings is being pertinent for every adult. Obviously for nurses, you're going to need more protective equipment than that to do your jobs. But then there are the issues of how young our kids wear masks are appropriate or not appropriate. There are the issues of, I was reading something yesterday about face shields and studies that indicate that they may be more effective than masks. And when I look at the argument about, by the way, I'm not giving you health advice here. Please, please, please know that I'm not doing that. But when it comes to face shields and younger students who need to see facial expressions and need to be able to see mouths moving, et cetera, there may be some solutions there. So my hope is the guidance that comes from the Department of Health, from the nurses' work, will address some of those things so that we essentially want to know the rules, right? One thing about us in education is we tend to be rule followers by default. And if you give us the rules, most of us are going to do our darndest to comply with them. So we're really looking for what are the parameters and how can we start to build from there.
Thank you. So the next question. I think it is important for education leaders in this state to say that school-based healthcare is a priority now more than ever. This should be at the top of the list of priorities. Would you please speak to this?
Yes, school-based healthcare should be a priority more now than ever and should be at the top of our priorities. Those needs for students and adults will be the driver of our ability to successfully open schools in whatever fashion we're going to open schools in the fall. So it's always important, but it couldn't be more important than it is right now as we find our way through this.
Thank you. Next question. I'm hearing information about July 1 will be the date we'll have more information. Is that correct? That superintendents have asked this of the AOE?
So I don't know anything about July 1 being an actual, here's when you'll get more type of date, but there is truth to the fact that superintendents, we did come up with a list of what we considered decision points, you know, things that are on our mind, a lot of which I've talked about today. And we provided the AOE with timelines that we felt would be appropriate. It won't shock you that some of those timelines were like 3 weeks ago, you know, and really the timeframes we were looking at were like mid-May up to July 1st, that we need these different things on these different timelines so that we can plan. I'm grateful that the AOE, I've seen from Secretary French and from some of the folks working with him, I've seen some of those things come to fruition already. For example, like graduation guidance. You know, we asked for graduation guidance by specific timeframes and by specific timelines so that people could plan appropriately, and that did happen. Now that guidance has evolved, and that evolving guidance has created some unique challenges in different places based on the plans they were making. but we've found that expressing what we need with our ideas on when has been helpful.
Thank you. This is going to be the last question. The other questions that have not been answered, we will get those answers for you as we've done in the past. All right, Dave, here you go. In districts, 1 RN is assigned to multiple schools. Is there any consideration of assigning an actual RN to every school, especially if this is recommended by the Department of Health?
It's a great question that again has lots of layers to it. So here's my best attempt at an answer. In my district, we have 5 schools. I've got a middle school, high school that's about 450 students. Got 2 elementary schools that run about 160 students apiece. Have another elementary school that is about 70 students, and another elementary school that is about 50 students. I can share with you that as a steward of public dollars, I am unable to justify a full-time nurse in an elementary school that has 50 students and 5 staff members in it. I just can't do it. We all across the state, we have little schools like that. Now in a school that has 450 students, piece of cake, right? The EQS that we're all familiar with and some of the parameters that are expressed there and the discussions about, 500 students to a nurse, et cetera. If you have a school that has, if you have a district that has 5 different schools of 100 students each, theoretically the EQS establishes that 1 nurse can cover those 5 schools and comply. I would suggest that compliance doesn't deliver quality nursing services to the students and the staff and the community of those schools. So there are some inherent challenges there. I think school districts are in a difficult place where they have to figure out how do we provide the best possible nursing care for our students while staying within the bounds of the law, while not risking the licenses of folks like you who are serving in school nurse roles. But there are some challenges that go with us being Vermont and us being as small and as spread out as we are. And while creating a concept of 1 full-time nurse in every school would be an ideal situation, as a person who has to manage that process, I can't see in that be an implementable situation in a Vermont context just because of how we're organized. So my desire is that our school nurses and the nursing association that we just work to make sure we're delivering the best, most effective care for students in our community. And I think that looks different in every single district and every single community. Doesn't mean that one model's right or wrong. It just means that we have some unique dynamics at play that we have to consider.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you very much for giving us your time and your information and support today. We look forward to further working with you. I have a couple of announcements for this group. We'd like you all to spread the word that UVM AHEC-sponsored new school nurse training will be held this year via Zoom on August 12th and August 13th from 8 to 12. Please look for additional information in the newsletter. And remember, the new school nurse training is for anyone who has been a school nurse for 3 years or less. There'll also be some additional information in the upcoming school nurse bulletins, so you can gather some of that information. Please join us next week when we hopefully will hear from Vermont School Nurses' favorite Director of Maternal and Child Health, Dr. Brina Holmes. She and I will speak about the draft of the Vermont Health Guidelines that the task force has been working on and the direction it looks like we may be headed for schools in the fall. Next week, June 11th, will be the last town hall meeting until August. We all need to take some time to have a sort of a summer break. And during that time, we encourage all of you to put your feet up, drink some iced tea, relax. We are getting through this. We are making progress. And And we will continue to do that. We hope in the fall to continue the town meetings we haven't finalized exactly how that will work, but we'll also be looking for more professional guest speakers and guideline details so that we can help you guide your return to practice. And if you have not yet signed up for the National Association of School Nurses Conference that is virtual this year, please do so. And we will virtually meet in Las Vegas. Also, any questions that come up, please continue to send them to covid-19@vssna.org. We will continue to provide as much guidance as possible. Please remember, just as your lives are getting super busy now at the end of the school year, so are ours. So if you don't hear from us right away, and personally I can say if you don't hear from me, send me another email, because as vssna.org president, I am getting hundreds of emails a day from all over the country, and I just get lost in them. It's not that I don't think you're important to me. I just get lost. That's the reality. So don't hesitate to ask us a second time if there's something that you want addressed. Again, thank you so very much for joining us. This recorded presentation will be available on our website. Answers to unanswered questions will also be available within the next day or two. Give you enough time for that one, Clayton?